This episode is made possible by audio. Get 70% off when you use the code Chapman70 at checkout. If you're anything like me, you probably have a little bit of a camera addiction. Even when I'm perfectly happy with my current camera, I'm always researching other brands and the latest releases, or even looking at older cameras like the Red Dragon that hold up really well today but can be had for a crazy discount because they're a little dated. But if you watched my last video, you'll know that the camera is only part of what makes a compelling video. Tons of award-winning short films, documentaries, and even features have been shot on cameras that pale in comparison to what we have access to today. So rather than fixating on what camera you need to buy, maybe consider spending your money on the unsung heroes of video production. In this episode, we're going to take a look at my top 5 most useful pieces of gear that aren't a camera. Okay, so you've got a fancy camera. You're all excited to shoot, you take it out of the box, slap on a lens, run outside, and you can't see the screen because it's a sunny day. Or you're like me and you're trying to see what your shot looks like while you're in the shot and your camera has a fixed screen. That's where my first recommendation comes in. The humble video monitor punches way above its weight in terms of usefulness. I went on a shoot without a monitor exactly one time, and it was one of the worst mistakes of my career. Not being able to see what you're shooting is not only frustrating and nerve-wracking, it's a great way to mess up a critical shot, especially if you're trying to pull focus manually. To make matters worse, most cameras shoot at least 4K these days. If your focus is even slightly off, the audience will see it. A lot of monitors have built-in focus assist tools like focus peaking, which if you're new to all this is basically just a colored outline that appears on the screen to highlight what's in focus. It's super useful, especially if you're shooting with a shallow depth of field or focusing manually. Monitors come in all shapes and sizes, and everyone has their preference. For me, I want the brightest monitor I can get and a screen that's large enough that I don't have to squint to see fine details. For the past 5 years or so, I've been using a fairly cheap 7-inch ultra-bright monitor from FeelWorld. It's rated at 2000 nits, so it's plenty bright even for direct sunlight. It's not the most advanced monitor in the world, it's all physical buttons and navigating the menus is a little fiddly, but for what I need, it's just about perfect. I've got it mounted on a small rig tilt and swivel mount so I can turn it around to face me while I'm recording my pieces to camera. It's got a few useful features, like a rule of thirds grid so I can more easily square up my composition, and focus peaking for when I need to double check the notoriously bad Blackmagic autofocus. There are literally hundreds of monitors out there, from a bunch of different brands. Small HD is one of the most respected names, but they've got a price tag to match. Just think about what you need out of a monitor, find one that checks those boxes, and you're good to go. If capturing well-framed, in-focus footage was number 1 on the list, capturing clean and clear audio has to be number 2. Let's be real. Built-in camera mics are garbage. They're only really intended to be used for scratch audio to sync in post. If you haven't invested in some form of decent audio yet, I would highly recommend you do so sooner rather than later. For most people, I'd say the most versatile mic you can get would be a lavalier. A shotgun like a Rode video mic is great, but what happens when you need to be a bit further away, or off to the side? With a camera-mounted shotgun, you're pretty much stuck to the same distance and framing, which can be pretty limiting, especially if you're working alone. A lavalier solves this problem. You could literally be on the moon, and as long as you clap when you start recording so you have a peak to line up in post, syncing your camera and lavalier audio is super easy. I'll show you, I'm wearing a lavalier now. I'm gonna go get some water. I'm walking to the kitchen. I'm turning on the light. I'm in the kitchen. I've got a glass. Getting some water. Walking back from the kitchen, turning off the light. Couldn't do that with a Rode mic. You can do the classic History Channel thing where you approach the camera from a distance. You can turn your back to the camera. You can mic up multiple people and not have to worry about swinging back and forth with a boom mic. It just makes things a whole lot easier. My personal preference is the Tentacle Track E. They're small, come with quality mics, they've got clever little rubber band labels to keep track of which is which, and most importantly, they record 32-bit float, which means that even if your talent starts yelling, it's never going to clip. That's huge for peace of mind. There are plenty of other solid options out there too. A lot of creators swear by the DJI mic. I have one too, it came with my Osmo Pocket 3, but it's got one critical flaw that keeps me from using it. It doesn't have a threaded lock for the lavalier. Each of the 2 or 3 times I've used it, it's come unplugged, completely ruining the audio. That's a deal breaker for me. If you're happy to wear the capsule on your shirt, that's not a concern. But if you're like me and you want to hide the mic, it's much safer to go with something like a Track E. Speaking of audio, the next item on my list is a subscription audio service. In my case, that's the sponsor of this episode, Audio. One of the most common questions I get asked is, where do I find music to use in my videos? There are a number of options out there, but the one that I've been using for a while now, and the one that I feel is the best bang for your buck, is Audio. There are a couple things that set them apart. For one, the price. Nothing comes close to Audio in that regard. Their lifetime membership is the same cost as some services' annual plan. But beyond that, they have an amazing library of tracks, with more being added all the time. And critically, they also have a massive catalog of sound effects, which make such a huge difference in how a video feels. Let me show you what I mean. Here's a quick snippet from one of my second thought videos. But if we zoom in a little bit, we can see where the current extinctions come into play. Habitat destruction is a major cause of the eradication of animal life on Earth. And here's the same clip with the music and sound effects removed. But if we zoom in a little bit, we can see where the current extinctions come into play. Habitat destruction is a major cause of the eradication of animal life on Earth. See the difference? Music and sound effects are the key to pacing, feel, and emotional impact. If you're not sold already, Audio also has this amazing new feature called Link Match AI. This is something I have been waiting for my entire career. I can't begin to tell you the number of times I've heard a song and been like, that's the one, that's the track I want to use. But it's copyrighted. With Link Match, you copy the link to the song, plug it in, and it analyzes the entire audio library and gives you the closest matches. This is such a time saver, it's insane. I've got creator friends who switched to Audio for this feature alone. And there are plenty of other options out there, but personally, I cannot recommend Audio highly enough. As a little thank you for fans of my work, Audio is currently offering 70% off their annual Pro plan when you use the code Chapman70 at checkout. Give it a try. I promise you'll love it as much as I do. Okay, next up is something a lot of new creators and filmmakers put off buying with excuses like, I'm a natural light photographer. No, stop that. Making use of available light sources is resourceful and can be useful in a pinch. But if you really want to control your image and create the best work possible, you gotta bite the bullet and buy a big honkin' key light. Now, some people go way overboard with a key, a fill, a hair light, practicals, RGB accent lights, and that's great. It can create a really polished look. But if you're just starting out, ignore all that and just invest in a decent, high-output key light. The big name in lighting these days is Aperture, but there are a bunch of excellent smaller companies putting out really great products at reasonable prices. I run multiple YouTube channels, one of them with almost 2 million subscribers, and I've been using the same Godox 150 for several years now. If I could go back in time, I might try to convince myself to go for a slightly higher output model, but even with the one I have now, I rarely take it over 30% power for my talking head shots. Can you get by without a big key light? Sure. It'll be more of a struggle, and your end product won't look as good as it could, but you can make it work. But if you already have a decent camera, you're wasting its potential by not giving it a quality light source to work with. Photography literally means writing with light. You need light to make a good image. Why not control the light and mold the image into what you want versus fighting unpredictable and inconsistent sources like the sun? Speaking of controlling the light, you'll need what's called a modifier in order to tame the harsh direct light you get from a bare LED. Most people opt for either a big softbox or a lantern. The right choice for you depends on the feel you're going for. A softbox is more directional, and can be made even more so with a honeycomb grid. This combination will provide nice soft light for your subject while controlling the spill, keeping your background mostly untouched. This is useful for darker, moodier shots and when you just want to supplement the available light and brighten up your subject. A lantern provides an omnidirectional throw, illuminating everything around it. If you're looking for a more evenly lit scene, this could be the way to go. These days, I lean more towards the lantern for my YouTube work, but both modifiers are versatile and effective. Take a look at what's available on sites like B&H and consider something in the 300 watt range. That should be plenty for most people. Aperture lights tend to be a bit pricey, so consider similar offerings from Godox, SmallRig, and Zhuin. A good light will last you years, so invest in something decent. It really will make a huge difference. Before I give you my number one piece of useful gear, I want to throw in one honorable mention. I hate when things run out of battery. Cameras are especially power hungry, and there's nothing worse than having to interrupt an interview subject when they're on a roll and say, hey, sorry, the battery's dying, just one sec. And then you have to stop recording on the camera and on the audio recorder and swap out the battery and start everything up again, and by then, your talent has lost their groove entirely, and it's just a bad time. You can avoid this by using bigger external batteries, or external power in general. But I'm giving the honorable mention specifically to VMount batteries. These things can power lights, cameras, monitors, gimbals. They can charge your phone or your laptop. And critically, even if you start to run low, you can just hot swap the battery because presumably you've still got your camera's normal battery to lean on while you're switching V-mounts. Then there are some cameras like the Canon R5C that won't even let you shoot in the highest quality without external power. V-mount batteries are indispensable when it comes to longer shoots or just saving your sanity. It's much nicer to worry about charging 2 of these guys versus a dozen little Canon batteries. Just keep in mind, if you travel for shoots, there is a limit on how much capacity is allowed on planes. I think for the US it's 99 watts, but double check your local regulations just to be safe. You can carry on as many of them as you want, as long as they're all individually under the watt-hour limit. Now the moment you've all been waiting for, my #1 recommended piece of gear. You might be surprised to learn that this is the cheapest item on the list by far. It also doesn't require any power. It's small enough to take with you anywhere, and if you lose it, you can replace it at pretty much any store. Have you guessed what it is yet? It's this, a humble pocket notebook. Let me explain. Most creative types are just a little bit scatterbrained. We've got a lot of stuff going on. We're constantly having ideas about new videos or things we need to do after this shoot. For the longest time, I would just forget all of that stuff immediately. I had heard a lot of people recommend pocket notebooks over the years, and I never really bought into it. It just kind of seemed like a trend. I thought I could just use my phone. But when I eventually decided I was sick of having work right at my fingertips all the time, I started leaving my phone across the room or in the car as much as possible and just carrying this around. If I have an idea, I write it down. If I need to check my to-do list, it's right in my pocket with no Twitter to distract me along the way. I can even pull this out when I'm conducting an interview without seeming rude. It sounds silly, but the simple act of writing something down on paper makes a big difference. I use this thing like a second brain. Anything that's rattling around in my head that I just want to be able to forget about for a while, I'll write in the notebook. That takes a surprising amount of stress off my plate. Trying to remember all the things you need to remember sucks. Then at the end of the day, I can flip through the notebook and transfer anything critical to somewhere else. Either a long-term planning notebook, a video idea page in Notion, or just send it off in a Discord DM or email. The older I get, the more I realize that being connected to your phone and the internet 24/7 is terrible for your mental health. And that's not me saying technology is bad or whatever. Obviously, that's not the case. I run 4 YouTube channels and a podcast. But disconnecting and touching grass is one of the best things you can do to keep yourself healthy and sane. You can get a dozen of these little notebooks for like $10, if that. Even if you're skeptical, I highly recommend you give it a shot. You might be surprised how much of a difference it makes in your everyday life. Okay, that's everything. 6 pieces of super useful gear that'll make you a better YouTuber, podcaster, filmmaker, or just a more organized and sane person. There are lots of other pieces that just barely missed earning a spot on the list, so let me know if you like this kind of video, and I might make a follow-up in the future. You can leave suggestions for other video topics in the comments below, and you can check out my other content by following the links on your screen. Drop a thumbs up if you liked the video, thumbs down if you hated it, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Here, I'll show you. I'm wearing a lavalier right now. I'm leaving the set. I am walking to the front door. I am opening the door. The door is locked. I'm unlocking the door and leaving. I am walking down the sidewalk. I see a squirrel. I think I'm just gonna stay out here. I'll finish recording this later. Work sucks. I'm gonna keep walking.